One of my favorite things about villains in comic book movies is that a lot of the time, an A-list actor will take a role in one of these as a villain because they don't need to commit to multiple movies. Ever since the days of Jack Nicholson as the Joker in Batman '89, sometimes villains even get top billing, and franchise movies tend to keep the same hero but swap out the villains. And this has its advantages. Just think about the X-Men movies. We got one-off villain appearances from Brian Cox, Liev Schreiber, Kevin Bacon, Peter Dinklage, Oscar Isaac, and Jessica Chastain. That is some serious talent, all of which were one and done. So we have a unique opportunity here to cast some characters that I definitely want to see stick around, but a couple of others who could show up once, steal the show, and then never appear again. For that reason, some of these actors are a little more high profile than my X-Men casting. I'm going to give you 9 characters with a bunch of actors who I think could play those roles. Before the video starts, comment with your favorite X-Men villains and who you think should play them. Also tweet it to me at twitter.com/NandoVMovies with the hashtag X-Men Fancast. Then we'll see if we match. Also, listen in the highlight panel as you may hear some familiar voices. So without further ado, you know where we're going. The Aculose Zone. Mr. Sinister is camp. And you may be wondering, why are we starting this with Mr. Sinister? Why not Magneto? He's the most important one, right? Sure, but here's the thing. I love Mr. Sinister. Don't get me wrong, I love Magneto as well. In fact, I think he may be the single most interesting comic book character of all time. We'll get into it. But as far as characters I cannot wait to see on screen, Sinister tops the list. Because, and let's skip around a little bit, previous versions, Mr. Sinister is easily the highest profile X-Men villain who, after 13 movies and after appearances from Riptide, Azazel, Angel Salvatore, Black Tom, Vanisher, Zeitgeist, Ajax, Angel Dust, The Reavers, Arclight, Agent Zero, and even Vuk. After all of those classic X-Men characters graced the silver screen, the most we've seen of Mr. Sinister is his name and a little diamond emblem thing. It would be like if it took 13 Batman movies before we saw the Penguin. And clearly, they were building towards Sinister being the big bad of Gen 2 with appearances from some version of his real name, Nathaniel Essex, popping up in X-Men Apocalypse, Logan, Deadpool 2, and even New Mutants. It would seem that he is pulling all of the strings, collecting mutant DNA, experimenting on mutant children, and I guess also starting some sort of mutant boarding school focused on like conversion therapy? That part doesn't make a lot of sense, but all in all, Sinister is making moves. And yet, we never got a look at good old Nate. I remember rumors that he was going to make a cameo appearance in New Mutants, which would have made sense, but that either turned out to be a lie or the idea was scrapped. And because of that, I really believe there's a good chance Mr. Sinister will be the first big X-Men villain in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, like Vulture in Homecoming. He's a character who has decades of comic book history, who was never in a movie before. So he is the perfect entry point for this new version of the franchise. Keeps everything fresh, shows that they're doing something new, but gives comic book fans something they've always wanted to see. And also, Mr. Sinister is just great. He deserves a movie. Because like I said, Mr. Sinister is camp. And camp just means exciting and ostentatious and theatrical. I don't think this was always the case with the character. At first look, he seems like some sort of super vampire down to the white skin, cape, and sometimes even serrated teeth. If anything, you would assume Sinister is some sort of super 90s edgelord villain. And to some extent, that's true. Sinister led a group of very edgy villains called the Marauders with names like Sabretooth and Malice and also Harpoon somehow. And Sinister was obsessed with Jean Grey and Scott Summers, but there was always a little camp there. I mean, come on, that cape? You don't just wake up with that cape. That is a choice. A terrific choice. One that says something about its wearer. But let's back up a little bit. Background again. Nathaniel Essex was a scholar in the 1800s who was obsessed with evolution. He eventually learned about the X gene and found the mutant Apocalypse, who we will get to, and was given superpowers by Apocalypse. This is very important. Mr. Sinister, traditionally not a mutant, but as the result of those superpowers, he has a regenerative healing factor. Sinister does not age. He's kind of a telepath. Sometimes he can teleport. And I want to say he can shoot energy blasts, but I honestly can't remember him doing that in the comics. It's probably something I just saw on the cartoon. So maybe that's just a cartoon thing. Mr. Sinister is also a big fan of cloning. He clones himself, he clones his goons, he's got the same vibe as Mr. Smith. He wants more me. One of my favorite Sinister stories is from Uncanny X-Men by Kieran Gillen, where the Extinction Team, led by Cyclops, finds Sinister leading a team of himself. And every time the X-Men kill one, another Sinister takes over. It's where this drawing actually comes from. It's where he says everything is sinister. Over time, I think Sinister Sinister has morphed from the less interesting evil vampire scientist to a far more interesting character. One who is exciting, dramatic, and most importantly, he enjoys this. Magneto, Trask, Apocalypse, Stryker, and most of the other big X-Men villains are as serious as a heart attack. And while Sinister is also dangerous, he's having fun. If there weren't any persecution, Magneto would start a family. He's in it to achieve a goal. If the X-Men ceased to exist, Sinister would find another team to torment because it's just what he does. He monologues, he's big on branding, and he dresses like a supervillain is supposed to dress. He has style, hence the cape. He is everything that The Incredibles was trying to break down, and he knows that, but Sinister does it anyway because it's fun. For his highlight panel, I want to take a look at two moments. First is a small one from the series Hellions. I share this online every so often, usually when someone dumb gets hoisted by their own petard. Havoc is a wreck after learning that the love of his life, Madeline Pryor, cannot be resurrected on Krakoa because she is a clone of Jean Grey, and Havoc bursts into tears. Sinister watches and says with a tremendous grin,
"I keep expecting this shit to get old, and it never does. Not once, not ever."
The second one is the panel that this image comes before. It is his reintroduction in Gillen's Uncanny X-Men 3. Sinister just been assassinated, and he explains why he believes he is the only one with the vision to remake society.
Apocalypse viewed evolution as good in of itself because he had no understanding of either art or science. What my old patron believed in was red and raw, natural selection. It is I who truly believes in evolution. Natural selection is a mechanism. It doesn't believe in better or worse. It merely believes in continued being. I believe in improvement. An improvement requires an aesthetic's eye to judge whether a success is worthy or otherwise. I understand the chain of being, and who is at the top, and who isn't. As will become evident as I bring this little skirmish to a close, and my society's mind brings you to your knees again.
My first 4 picks. There are a few actors that I believe could play Mr. Sinister, should they be so lucky. There were rumors that John Hamm was being courted for Sinister in New Mutants. I don't know if that was real or just speculation. Either way, Hamm is imposing, he's charming, but not above having fun. I think he could do it, but I also think we could go deeper. After all, we are living in the golden age of scenery-chewing villain performances. Like, hey, Essex is British, right? How about Daniel Craig? A mix of the will of James Bond and the whimsy of Benoit Blanc works really well for Sinister. Or Paddington 2's own Hugh Grant. Take some Phoenix Buchanan, add a dash of whatever his name was from The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and boom, you've got yourself a Sinister. Or, speaking of Man from U.N.C.L.E., listen, do I think this is the most effective use of Henry Cavill in the Marvel Cinematic Universe? Probably not. He'd be a wonderful Hyperion, or Sentry, or Gladiator, or any of the other Superman pastiches in Marvel Comics pantheon. Also, maybe Captain Britain. However, I would like to give him an opportunity to branch out a little bit, especially since he's been playing villains in like Mission Impossible movies. I really liked Henry Cavill's attitude in The Man from U.N.C.L.E., and I think that would fit Sinister here. The winner. You guys, I have 7 syllables for you. Antonio Banderas. Come on, it would be so much fun. We get the charm of Zorro mixed with the playfulness of Puss in Boots. The man was fun in Spy Kids, and he's already played a rich jerk in the movie The Laundromat. An okay movie where, spoiler alert, Meryl Streep was the Panamanian woman the whole time. That movie came out in 2019. Wild. And Banderas has had a string of villainous performances as of late, with Doolittle and Uncharted. Neither movie quite worked, but he was doing his best, and I appreciate the performance. Overall, Banderas has the charm, the presence, and the spirit to properly introduce a character as fabulous as Mr. Sinister to the masses. So that's Antonio Banderas for from Mr. Sinister. Moving on. And yeah, the drawings are back. People liked him. You guys commented, which I really appreciate. Also, I'm doing a new thing, and I'm taking one significant color from the image and putting it into the drawing. So he got red since he wears a lot of red and has that weird little red diamond on his head, which I don't know for the life, and I don't know what it does, if it has any significance whatsoever. It's just kind of there. In fact, in that Uncanny X-Men comic, Hope just shoots it at one point. She says, what kind of idiot puts a target on his head? And that is a good question. But I guess with Mr. Sinister, it's like, he doesn't care if he gets shot. He has lots of Mr. Sinister, so screw it, put the diamond on. But it's like sometimes it's like a physical gem, and I feel like sometimes it just looks more like face paint. I don't think it has any like religious significance or anything like that. But it's not like Vision in the comics was the solar gem, where that's how he gets his power. He like sucks it in. He absorbs the power of the sun and then is able to power himself with that. It's just like a decorative gem, which is great. Mr. Sinister, listen, if you just came up with that one day and you were like, this is a cool look, go with it. It looks terrific. I'm just curious is all. Anyway, let's switch gears a little bit. Magneto is right. Not to go all Quentin Quire here. Maybe he's not right, but Magneto is not wrong either. He has been through it. When he was around 10, Max Eisenhardt, later known as Erich Lenscher, and his family were captured by Nazi soldiers and put into a concentration camp. Max was the only survivor. Because of that experience, he spent the rest of his life fighting against the darkest parts of humanity. Erich took on the name Magneto since he is the mutant master of magnetism and assembled the Brotherhood of Mutants. Magneto led his team on a crusade to liberate persecuted mutants around the world. And when things get difficult, Magneto is not afraid to call for help. He has an ego, sure, but he'll work with his enemies for the greater good. And he is always adjusting his strategy, fighting the X-Men, working with the X-Men, fighting the humans, leaving them entirely. Magneto has a goal, and he will do whatever he believes is necessary to achieve that goal. Where Charles believes that humans and mutants can live in peace, Eric sees himself as more of a realist. He would love for Charles's dream to come true, but it's nothing more than a dream to him, a fantasy. Eric has seen the worst humanity has to offer. He is not willing to take that chance again. For mutants to survive, Magneto believes they either need to isolate themselves or take over. Magneto has an incredibly strong will, a noble purpose, and the respect of all mutant kind. When the chips are down, Magneto usually does the right thing, but when he's at odds with the Professor, he cannot be stopped. He's even traditionally such a determined figure that he is immune to mind control. It wasn't until recently that the helmet turned out to be wired to block Charles's mind control. Originally, the Professor just couldn't read Magneto's mind simply by virtue of the fact that Magneto did not want him to. That is cool. Magneto is also somewhat theatrical. He believes in big displays, setting examples, and he knows how to make an entrance. After all, symbols have power. Why just take over the Sentinels when you can do it on TV in a stadium? I mean, the helmet. That doesn't have a purpose, or at least it didn't originally, but Magneto knew it made him look cool. And Magneto believes himself to be superior to most humans. He could kill pretty much everyone in a room if he decides to, so he doesn't need to prove himself to anyone. Magneto thinks incredibly highly of himself, and the actor who plays Magneto needs to be able to exhibit that extreme confidence. But on top of all of that, Magneto thinks he's a good guy. Yes, they say all villains do this, but Magneto especially. And the comics sort of agree. He was the leader of the X-Men for a while. He is currently one of the rulers of Krakoa, and when the Beyonder brought the heroes and villains of Earth to Battleworld, Magneto was on Team Hero. You disagree with the Beyonder? How about you take a look at those shoulder pads? Yeah, I didn't think so. And the last thing, Magneto is Jewish. Now, I've seen plenty of arguments from people who believe that the origin of Magneto should change, mostly because of the amount of time that has passed since the original books were released. Comic Magneto was created a mere 20 years after World War II. He could easily be a man in his mid-30s while also being a Holocaust survivor. As time has passed though, Magneto has gotten older and his timeline has gotten blurrier, and that's a problem in the movies. Currently in the comics, all of the X-Men are living on a magic island where they're able to be resurrected via a complicated cloning process. Thank you, Mr. Sinister. But hypothetically, this version of Magneto, who exists in 2022 as a man in his, let's say, 60s, was also alive for the Holocaust. In comics, this is usually dealt with like this. Don't worry about it. And then we all move on. Every so often a character moves on to a new age. Robin, who is a child, becomes Nightwing, an adult. But even then, Nightwing stays around his mid-20s, early 30s for decades. Characters like Spider-Man get older sometimes, but are usually reset by some sort of cosmic nonsense. And sometimes you get a character like Tony Stark, who has a comic origin tied to a real-world event. Specifically, Stark was inspecting some weapons being used in the Vietnam War and was captured by a North Vietnamese warlord, hence Iron Man. However, in the Extremis story released in 2005, Tony Stark's origin changed. He was still a prisoner of war, but it was now the war in Afghanistan, and it didn't really change much about the character, so we all went with it. It was good. That is a solution. Also, every so often, a story like The History of the Marvel Universe by Mark Waid will make an effort to recontextualize some of those historically significant origins. They used the fictional Marvel nation of Sin Kong as a proxy Vietnam. That way, characters like Frank Castle and James Rhodes and Ben Grimm could fight in a war that very much resembles the Vietnam War that they fought in their original comic origins, but it can take place whenever you want, 20 years from the current year. It is genius. I don't believe that's the solution with Magneto, since the power of the character comes from his historically unambiguous origin. Magneto survived the Holocaust, so I doubt Marvel's solution will be to create a new country called Schmermany, where a war very much like World War II took place in the year 2000. Similarly, I don't think you can map all of this to somewhere like Sokovia, but it just never got mentioned by Wanda or Pietro. I don't think that works either. I have heard the suggestion that Magneto should be a survivor of a different world event, either a black man who fought for civil rights in America or a South African victim of apartheid. Those are the two I hear the most. And while I understand the rationale behind this idea, I do not think it's worth throwing out the Holocaust origin, mostly because Magneto was a character created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, who are both Jewish, and then he had his origin expanded upon by Chris Claremont, who is also Jewish. Magneto's origin is so personal and specific that it feels wrong to change it. Plus, this is the MCU, baby. We got time travel, we got magic, we got all kinds of other nonsense. It would be so easy to invent a good reason why Magneto was born in the 1920s and is currently around 50. Make him age super slow. Magnets, right? How they work. If we buy into power bands, I don't see why Magneto can't just be the ultimate power band. I mean, power bands are nonsense, but you get the point. And because it's such a big part of the character, I want a Jewish actor. That's what I was getting at here. Especially since after 2 Magnetos, we still have not had one. So I'm looking for someone who is serious, purposeful, compassionate, a leader, and also Jewish. Finding a highlight panel for Magneto was a tricky one. It's a tough one to pick, but I decided to go with the opening of God Loves Man Kills, where Magneto finds 2 murdered children and swears revenge.
So young, so innocent, to know such terror and pain. Their only crime that they had been born. And for all my vaunted power, I was unable to save them. No more shall die, but those responsible for this atrocity. Whatever the cost, however long it takes, I will hunt them down and make them pay.
Previous versions, Magneto was almost too good, so engaging on screen that he immediately became the focus of every movie he was in. That worked well in the first 2 movies of both generations, X1 and X2, and then First Class and Days of Future Past, but eventually it became sort of a burden. Characters like Apocalypse and Phoenix were being overshadowed by Magneto, and yes, a lot of that has to do with the fact that they weren't that great in their movie, still not ideal. McKellen's Magneto had the condescending thing down pat. He was also really funny, not like haha funny, but witty. I don't think he gets enough credit for lines like,
"Storm, fry him."
Oh yes, a bolt of lightning into a huge copper conductor. I thought you lived at a school.
and
Mr. Stryker!
Sonny, we keep running into each other.
this is funny. This is good. Fassbender's Magneto, on the other hand, was pure anger, which worked very well in an origin. I think my problem with Magneto comes from how many times he was reset in that universe. He quits being a villain at the end of Days of Future Past, and then he's dragged back in Apocalypse. Then he quits again, and he's dragged back in Dark Phoenix. It just felt like this endless cycle of no development for this character. Overall, my big problem with Gen 1 and Gen 2 Magnetos is that they were both working with the good guys more often than against them. them. X-Men 1 and X-Men The Last Stand are the only movies where Magneto is consistently working against the heroes. In all of the rest, he either starts working with the heroes or eventually joins them. I want a Magneto who is firmly on his own side. He teams up with the X-Men once for the end game of that universe, but not before that. Otherwise, it's just not that big of a deal. Runners up. So I have 4 actors who I believe could do this. It is quite a wish list of actors who would probably never do it, but I'm gonna list them anyway. First up, Joaquin Phoenix could 100% play Magneto. He is a phenomenal actor. He's got a ton of range. He could do it. Second, keep an open mind here, Sacha Baron Cohen. He's not just Borat. He can do a lot of different things, and he's been trying to take on different roles in the last couple of years. I also believe he could be very imposing, so I think he'd be worth a look. Third, he's a bit older than I'd love, but I mean, Daniel Day-Lewis is one of the best actors ever, so he could also absolutely play Magneto. I doubt he would want to be tied down to a 50-movie Marvel contract, but hey, it's worth mentioning here. I could also see Adrian Brody working as Magneto. He has experience playing a Holocaust survivor in The Pianist, a movie for which he won an Oscar, so that's a good place to start, and he's also in Succession, just like Tom. The winner. Sometimes I want to go against the grain, reinvent the wheel, and sometimes you guys are right. Jason Isaacs would be a perfect Magneto. He's the total package. He is scary. He is determined. You don't want to cross him. I will never forget his performance in The Death of Stalin as Marshal Zhukov. He switches from cordial to murderous in an instant. What more could you ask for? And considering his involvement in a certain wizarding world, we know that he is not afraid of a big franchise. So yeah, Jason Isaacs, put it on the board. Mystique is a survivor. Mystique does what she needs to survive. She'll switch sides, form alliances, change identities. She's flexible. Mystique is a killer, but not always. She says in one of the comics she knows how to kill, but also how not to. Mystique will get dirty if it's required, or she has a grudge, but she has her limits. But Mystique does not just survive, she thrives. As the ultimate spy, she takes on dangerous life or death missions, but she doesn't forget to have fun, because Mystique has seen so much and done this so many times. The challenge of a real, honestly difficult task is entertaining. Like Apollo fighting Rocky. A real test of her skills shows her what she loves about the game. And Mystique is the ultimate spy. She has to be the best in the Marvel universe. Not only can she perfectly match someone's outward appearance, Mystique is also incredibly clever. She's a talented actor. It is a craft that she works at, so Mystique can fool people very close to who she is impersonating. And Mystique has decades upon decades of experience. It isn't clear how old Mystique is, but I wouldn't be surprised if she were at least in her hundreds. And because of those years of watching the world turn, Mystique is guarded. She does not let too many people in, partially because of your run-of-the-mill persecuted mutant cynicism, but also just because she's seen people taken down by the ones closest to them. Mystique is even one of a few individuals who cannot have their mind read by a telepath, since her brain is constantly shifting. So no one, not even Professor X, can read her thoughts unless she wants them to. But Mystique is not completely isolated. She's also the wife of mutant clairvoyant Destiny. They're a couple, and if they aren't, everyone dies. Their relationship is pretty special. Destiny can see the future, and she works with Mystique to keep that future safe. Mystique is also a surrogate mother to Rogue. Originally in the comics, Mystique was even going to be Rogue's actual father. You heard that right, but they cut it because they're cowards. But Mystique does care about people. Mystique is also Nightcrawler's mother and raised him a bit before she abandoned him. She also abandoned the son she had with Sabretooth, although that was just because he wasn't a mutant. But Mystique changes. Sometimes she's a deadbeat, but later on she's willing to raise a child that's not even her own. And while her alliances frequently shift, Mystique is always working for herself. Mystique will lie, cheat, and steal her way to whatever outcome benefits her and her family. My highlight panel for Mystique comes from Brian K. Vaughan's Mystique series. She's just gone through a morally complex mission for Xavier and fought a mind-controlled Forge. During the fight, she used a line about how Forge makes her better to trick him. After the fight, Forge asks if what she said was true, and Mystique answers,
"Oh, that was definitely a lie. Trust me, your unshakable belief that I can improve is your most annoying quality. Forge, I don't think I can be any better because I already know I'm the best. I'm sorry you have a hard time comprehending my morality, but I don't. I'm proud of the hard decisions I'm strong enough to make. I'm proud of what I've done for people like us. Believe it or not, I'm perfectly happy with who I am. Thanks. Whatever I told you tonight was just a yarn I spun to help beat you.
Previous versions. Honestly, I liked Rebecca Romijn's Mystique a little more than Jennifer Lawrence. Yes, Romijn played an older, more seasoned Mystique, but she was also just generally more competent, an excellent hand-to-hand fighter, strategic, and a great sense of humor. I love this line.
Can you shut it down from here?
No.
I also enjoyed how much fun Mystique seemed to be having. There was a flair to Mystique in those first 3 movies, pulling off sick flips and then taunting her enemies by licking her lips. Like, it's just fun. I think Jennifer Lawrence's Mystique was a fine character, but a lousy Mystique, especially because as time went on, she got worse at her job, and then by the end of Apocalypse, she was just an X-Men. She didn't feel like the free agent I expect from Mystique. Kinda felt like she was written as another character, like maybe Rogue, but Mystique was more marketable, and she fit into the X-Men movie's stupid timeline. I think Days of Future Past Mystique mostly worked for me, and her fight scene was great, but besides that, the character never had the confidence I expect from Mystique. I was also never a huge fan of the scales. I think Mystique can just be blue. Who cares? I did love the effect in X2 where Mystique is being tormented by Cerebro 2, and she flips between a bunch of different disguises, but yeah, the scales just feel like over-designing. And she needs to have flowing red hair, and the dumb skull, which Connor from Cerebro assured me was just there because it looks neat. Runners up. I think we have an incredibly deep bench here. We're looking for basically anyone who could also play Catwoman, and since skin color is not an issue, everyone's on the table. Age-wise, I'd love someone in her 30s. It can be ambiguous, but in practical terms, if Mystique can look any age, 30s is usually where she lands. She needs to look older than the 20-year-old members of the Brotherhood that she leads, but not that much older. Speaking of Catwoman, hey, screw it. Zoe Kravitz could totally play Mystique. Maybe she should, but I'm betting she's not looking to get tied down to another mega franchise, but if she wants it, should totally be hers. And second, that also goes for Anne Hathaway, whose Catwoman has really grown on me over the years. And I think just because of how similar those characters are, she'd be a solid Mystique too. Or third, how about Alexandra Daddario? Yeah, she's been in some flops like Baywatch and Percy Jackson, but she's also been in True Detective and The White Lotus, and most importantly, one very funny episode of It's Always Sunny. I have faith that she could pull this off. Fourth, right now I'm a big fan of Lily James. I'm really digging Pam and Tommy. To be honest, she's been on my radar since Mamma Mia. Plus, James also already knows Bucky from Pam and Tommy, so, maybe they have a Marvel history as well. But the winner. So it's actually 50-50 on this one, and I want to give an honorable mention, second place, to Ana de Armas. She's incredibly talented, so in demand right now, and I think she could have a lot of fun with this role. Think Paloma from No Time to Die, like not exactly the same character, but the same energy. Joy coupled with a machine gun. But the winner for me has always been Megan Fox. She's perfect. And you know what? We owe Megan Fox a big role where she gets to be awesome after everything we put her through. I remember making tons of jokes at her expense, like as if she wrote those Transformers movies. And then Jennifer's body flopped, even though it's actually great. It's shame on us, but forget the restitution. Megan Fox is also just perfect for this role. She has the swagger of Mystique. I'm mostly looking at her role in New Girl. In that show, she gets it. She's attractive, she's smart, more so than any of her friends. She's not quite a jerk about it either, but it's like just a fact that she knows, and everyone else knows. That's what I want from Mystique. Not quite as big of an ego as someone like Sinister or Emma, but up there. So Megan Fox should play Mystique. Emma Frost is flawless. I'll be honest, up until maybe 2012, I never got Emma Frost. She nearly worked for me in Astonishing X-Men, but it wasn't until Grant Morrison's New X-Men that I figured her out. Emma Frost was introduced as the White Queen of the Marvel Illuminati known as the Hellfire Club. That's different from the Illuminati that exists in the Marvel Universe. Later, she started the Massachusetts Institute and formed her own team of mutant kids known as the Hellions. They were just like a bizarro new mutants who all got killed. Wild costumes though. Then she took over as the head of Generation X, a team of young X-Men, but was fired. Then she became a teacher on Genosha, the mutant sanctuary, right before it was destroyed and everyone died but her. Then Emma joined the X-Men, fell in love with Scott Summers, and threw the entire school into disarray. Emma Frost pretends to be above it all, acts like she's better than everyone else, but deep down, she's just as messed up as the rest of the X-Men. The glamour and the luxury is all facade to protect a person who has been at the center of an unbelievable amount of tragedy. But she's strong, clever, determined, and knows how to get what she wants. Emma Emma has managed to take over the Hellfire Club, establish the Hellfire Trading Company. She currently sits on the Quiet Council of Krakoa, and she's done a lot of good for mutant kind as a member of the X-Men. She's also incredibly fashionable. It's part of the image she creates. Emma Frost wears expensive white clothes, including many outfits designed by Jumbo Carnation himself. Her style could be described as revealing, but I mean, like, look, it could also be described as just what the hell is even holding those things up. She's always used her looks to get one over on whoever she's currently trying to control, and it works for her. As far as powers go, Emma Frost is a powerful telepath. Not quite at Jean Grey's level, but above most others. She knows what everyone's thinking all the time, uses that to her advantage. She's constantly reading minds, no boundaries there. And then Emma also developed a secondary mutation while on Genosha that lets Emma turn her entire body into a flexible diamond-like material, making her virtually indestructible, although it does have its limits. So we're looking for someone with a strong will, can play a hero as well as a villain. Emma Frost's highlight panel comes from her issue of X-Men Black. It was a short series from a few years back where each issue focused on a different villain. In the Emma-centric issue, written by Leah Williams, Emma takes control of the Hellfire Club from Sebastian Shaw and writes the X-Men a letter.
Here's what I've learned about grief. It is a violent thing. It simmers under your skin. Their name constantly crawls up the back of your throat, clawing for purchase to make a shrieking escape just because you are so wretchedly desperate to hear it spoken aloud again, even just once. You will live this way for months. Grieving burns away a part of you, and what grew there once never will again. But the good news is that you will eventually find there are new directions for you to still grow in, to go in. In this way, sorrow's method of self-immolating can actually be quite beautiful.
Previous versions, I did not like January Jones' Emma Frost. She felt just kind of low energy. Everything that Emma Frost does, she should do with purpose, but the Emma Frost in First Class was little more than Shaw's lackey. Also, I hate the outfit from the beginning of the movie. It is a bad representation of her style. Emma Frost wears cool things that you couldn't even imagine, not like a bra. Also, I didn't like her diamond form. She needs to be able to emote as a diamond, and her outfits need to work with the diamond skin. The skin doesn't make the outfit just go away. And also, her hairstyle in the diamond should be the same as out of the diamond. It's a small thing, but it bugged me. Also, when Emma Frost did show up in X-Men Origins Wolverine, but she just seems to sort of be blonde and diamond, and also the timelines don't even kind of match up, although I do like the way her diamond skin looked better than the First Class one. Runners up, nope, not gonna bother. The winner. We have one. We have a real-life Emma Frost, Vanessa Kirby. First of all, she's a good actor. She won a BAFTA for her performance on The Crown, was nominated for lots of awards recently for Portrait of a Woman. Second, she just looks like Emma Frost. Blonde and elegant, like that's her. And she was even in Mission Impossible as a character named the White Widow who wore all white. And that was when I was like, oh, that's Emma Frost. And third, and just as important as the other two, she was in Hobbs and Shaw. She's not above a big dumb franchise. Not that this is going to be that. This is going to be very good, but she doesn't take herself so seriously that she'd never do some sort of silly comic book movie, which is always good. So Vanessa Kirby is Emma Frost. Sebastian Shaw is power. Shaw is everything you expect from a powerful mutant. He is strong, well-connected, rich, and confident. While other mutants are known for being the leader of the Hellfire Club, a position Shaw holds, they usually go on to bigger and better things. Emma Frost joined the X-Men. Roberta DaCosta, Sunspot, joined the New Mutants. But Sebastian Shaw is almost exclusively either the Lord Imperial of the Hellfire Club, or he's scheming to take back control of the club. He's a one-trick pony. Shaw came from old money, real old. His family has been part of the Hellfire Club for generations. And I guess since we didn't really do it with Emma, now would be a good time to go into detail about what that means. All of these concepts will definitely show up in the first movie that features Shaw, so let's answer the question, what is the Hellfire Club? The idea of a Hellfire Club is actually more common than you'd expect. In the 1800s, clubs where rich people would convene and hang out were known as Hellfire Clubs. They got up to some business, think Eyes Wide Shut, but weren't necessarily the Illuminati. The Marvel Marvel Hellfire Club started as a club of British residents living in the colonies during Revolutionary War times. Over time, the club morphed into a full-on Illuminati. To become a member, you either needed to be the son or daughter of a current member or just weasel your way in. Shaw's family has been in the Hellfire Club since its inception. While they did not start off as a mutant organization, that eventually became the most interesting feature of the Hellfire Club. Shaw's hostile takeover put himself, Harry Leland, Jason Wingard, Tessa, and Emma Frost into power. All mutants. For a reason I never quite understood, there was also a high-ranking member of the club named Donald Pierce, who is not a mutant, just a cyborg. But besides Pierce, the inner circle is all mutants. The Hellfire Club slogan, which I'm definitely about to pronounce poorly, is Fais ce que tu voudras, which translates to do what thou will. And that's basically their deal. They believe their status as wealthy and connected people makes them better than everyone else, and they should be able to do whatever they want, so they got together to just do that. I'm willing to bet we will see the Hellfire Club pretty quickly in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, since they've only been in one previous movie, and they were really the Hellfire Club in name only. So I'm betting we'll get Shaw, Frost, Leland, a female mastermind to balance it out, known as Lady Mastermind, and maybe Pierce as members of the Inner Circle. And if the Hellfire Club is rich jerks, Shaw is the richest jerk among them, who thinks he is superior to everybody else. He also has a fun power. He can absorb kinetic energy and redirect it with like a big punch. So he's traditionally very physically imposing, also dresses like Ben Franklin. I think it would be a shame if we did not import that into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. My highlight panel for Sebastian Shaw comes from Classic X-Men 7, which chronicles Shaw's rise to power. Shaw learns that the current White King of the Hellfire Club, Samuel Buckman, was responsible for the attack that killed Shaw's paramour, Lord Chantal. He goes to the Hellfire Club with his loyalists, like Frost, Leland, and Tess, and overthrows the human club leadership. Shaw says,
I wasn't your enemy until you made me one. The one thing a man truly possesses is his word. I thought that meant something. The king is dead, and his council with him. Lords was worth a lot of them and more. In their place and her memory shall rise the Lord's Cardinal. No longer will mutants be victims, but rulers, first of the Hellfire Club, and then the world.
Previous versions, we've only had one Shaw so far, and he was pretty fun, but barely Shaw. I made an entire video about why I don't think he was a terrific representation of the character. I did enjoy the style and the confidence of the performance, but besides that, I think the first class Shaw shared more with comic Mr. Sinister than comic Sebastian Shaw. Runners up. I want some big white dudes. Let's start with two who've kind of already been a part of MCU or MCU adjacent stuff, but I think we could still swing here. Ray Stevenson played Volstagg in the Thor movies. However, most people probably don't know that, and why would they? The movies had, zero interest in the Warriors 3 after Thor 1, but he's a big old dude who can play Shaw easily. In that same vein, Liev Schreiber was Sabretooth in the Wolverine movie we don't talk about anymore. Who knows if that's connected to the MCU? Probably not, but anyway, he would make a fantastic Sebastian Shaw. It's Ray Donovan. He's a mix, a little bit emotional, and a lot of tough. Third, I know he gets cast in a lot of roles all the time, but I think Sebastian Shaw is somewhere where Bryan Cranston could shine. He's got a huge personality, and he can be as bad as anybody. Fourth, he's come up already on the list, and I know he'd be a fine Sinister, but I honestly think John Hamm would make a much more fun Sebastian Shaw. Don Draper with mutton chops and a puffy shirt. The winner. Thought about this one for a while, and then it came to me. I would love to see Justin Theroux take a shot at Shaw. He's physical, seen in That Time He Dance Fought Hansel, and also The Leftovers. I just think he's criminally undervalued in Hollywood. Also, he wrote Iron Man 2, so the man understands good writing. He was the Cyrano to Sam Rockwell's Christian. I guess that makes me Roxanne. Either way, Theroux for Shaw, put it in the books. Juggernaut is, wait for it, unstoppable. And yes, I realize the drawing looks like a koala. Oh, hey, editing Nando here, just taking a little break. Want to talk to you guys about the Juggernaut. I have to make this point before you actually start seeing the Juggernaut part of the video, because I think you guys may be kind of confused, but I think it's worth mentioning, and I didn't do it originally, so here we go. The Juggernaut is powered by something called the Crimson Gem of Cyttorak. Cyttorak is a space demon thing, another one of those entities like the Vashanti in the Marvel Universe who are somewhere between cosmic and mystical. It's unclear. Anyway, I, for my whole life, have called this thing the Gem of Cyttorak. It wasn't until I recorded this video And then I got the recording of the highlight panel from the fantastic YouTuber who helped me to record it, that they called it Cyttorak. And I said, well, that's not it. Wait, is that how you're supposed to say it? Because it's never come up in a movie. I was sure it'd come up in a cartoon, but I couldn't remember how you're actually supposed to pronounce that made-up word. So I went back and did some looking. Is it Cyttorak or is it Cyttorak? First place I found it pronounced was Spider-Man and the Amazing Friends, which was a cartoon from the 80s. And in that, Juggernaut pronounces it
Cyttorak.
And I said, wait a second, have I been wrong about this the whole time? So then I tweeted about it. I was very appreciative. Someone named Ty on Twitter sent me a link to a video from the 90s animated show where he calls it Cyttorak. So I said, oh, I guess that's what it's called. But then Andreas on Twitter, and again, I'm so thankful to everybody that came into this tweet because I was very curious. They pointed me to a behind the scenes clip from Infinity War where Stan Lee is standing with Benedict Cumberbatch all dressed up like Doctor Strange. And Stan Lee says,
By the crimson rings of Cyttorak.
I said, Cyttorak? I always thought it was Rack. But Stan Lee, he's Stan Lee. He invented this character, so he knows, I assume. So in the video, I call it Cyttorak. In the highlight panel, person reading it calls it Cyttorak. And according to Stan Lee, both of us are wrong. It is Cyttorak. So thank you for indulging this dumb curiosity I have. Back to the thing. An absolute mountain of a man. The Juggernaut is the most formidable brawler the X-Men frequently face. He's not shown any desire on world domination. Usually, Kane Marco just wants either revenge on his stepbrother or to cause destruction. Eventually, he did go good, even lost the Juggernaut powers for a bit, but generally, the Juggernaut is simple. He cannot be stopped. That's his power. Although, not a mutant power. The Juggernaut is actually a normal man who, through a magic crystal, became the avatar of the demon Cyttorak and is transformed into a literal Juggernaut. And he's developed over time, he's been a good guy, even slept with She-Hulk that one time, even though she denies that comic exists. But my favorite Juggernaut is one who is just bad. Just a big old monster man who everyone needs to work together to stop. That is my Juggy. My highlight panel for Juggernaut is a simple one. It's his introduction in Uncanny X-Men issue 12, all the way back in 1963. The Juggernaut has come to the X-Mansion to kill his stepbrother. The X-Men have set up various defenses that the Juggernaut is plowing through. And while the students are watching, the professor gives a very succinct introduction to how the Juggernaut works and why the X-Men are in trouble. Charles says,
Cyttorak is the most mysterious of all the deities of black magic. When he was finally driven from our world, he left behind him the curse of the Juggernaut. As for the power of the Juggernaut, I simply quote the dictionary. A gigantic, inexorable force that moves onward irresistibly, crushing anything it finds in its path. Only the Juggernaut could have made Cerebro shriek the way it did, and only the Juggernaut could prove invulnerable to all our defenses.
Previous versions. Okay, so we got two versions of Juggernaut in the X-Men movies, and honestly, I was not a huge fan of either. First, you've got X-Men The Last Stand's Vinnie Jones, who I could probably make a whole nother video essay about. So I did. It's called In Defense of the Juggernaut, and you can watch it exclusively on Nebula. More on that later. The short version is he didn't look right, and he didn't work the way Juggernaut usually does. But I think they nailed the spirit of how you fight the character and how the character works in a way that the next one didn't. Second, you've got the Juggernaut from Deadpool 2, and he has exactly the opposite problem. He looked great, he was big, scary, didn't have that stupid helmet or that whatever was going on X3 Juggernaut's abs, and he was able to keep the helmet in jail for some reason, but he talked way too much because that's how Deadpool movies work, and he went out like an absolute chump. Runners up. I don't think we really need any here because the winner. As I see it, we've got two options. First one, we can have the Juggernaut be completely CGI, like in Deadpool 2. I think that costume needs work. I want a wider helmet, but something like that is an option. Other option, I think we can take a humongous man, like Half-Thor Bjornsson, the Mountain from Game of Thrones, dress him up like the Juggernaut, and then boost him up with some CGI or maybe some Gandalf-y camera tricks. Juggernaut needs to look way bigger than human, but I understand the urge to want to put some physicality into the role on set, so maybe having an actual giant muscle man there would work. But most importantly, and this is totally just my opinion, the Juggernaut should almost never speak. He is a force of nature. He cannot be reasoned with, and his goal is simple. He wants to kill Charles. And as far as he knows, he can easily do that, so why bother talking? And the less he speaks, the scarier he is. Bobby comes in with a quip, Nothing. Cyclops tries to reason with him? Nothing. Jean reads his mind? Nothing. He's pure will. So have him on set or don't. Do CGI or don't. But besides saying Charles a few times, I don't want to hear a word out of him. So for his picture here, I'm going to put half Thor Bjornsson, but I'm going to put a little asterisk that I want a bunch of CGI. That will also come up later. Apocalypse is evolution. He's the big boss. The X-Men's Thanos. En Saba Noor, the first one. I love Apocalypse. He does not mess around. He's the end game. He's been alive since ancient Egypt. He has one of the most OP mutant powers, and he didn't stop there. He upgraded himself with parts from a celestial ship. Apocalypse is always changing, always shifting, always evolving. Apocalypse needs to be big, physically, audibly, historically, massive. This is the most important thing. Here's the basic history of the character, and I think all of it could be in the MCU. He's the first mutant, if you don't count a couple of others. Grew up in ancient Egypt, took over, believes in mutant supremacy, survival of the fittest. I believe he got locked up for a while, then came back, found a celestial ship, and upgraded himself. That's where all the wires and the armor come from. He met Mr. Sinister, turned him into a weird vampire guy, then I believe got locked up again, and then came back to fight the X-Men, yada yada. It's kind of a cycle of that. He goes away and comes back, goes away, comes back. We have Celestials in the MCU. We're about to get very into ancient Egypt and Moon Knight. I don't see why we can't throw Apocalypse into the mix and mold together those two aspects of the character. But here's the interesting thing about Apocalypse. He likes mutants. He wants them to succeed as a species. So he does recruit them willingly when he can. He needs to be charismatic. And when that doesn't work, mind control. But I want an Apocalypse who is excited to share the good news. I'm here. The mutants are going to finally take over. Join me. And some mutants do. They become his horsemen and do his bidding. He can be a passionate leader. Part of what the MCU needs to do with Apocalypse is seed him gradually into the universe. Like Ronan in Guardians of the Galaxy, we need to see Sinister as a big threat, and then when he's defeated, get the sense that there's actually someone behind Sinister who's going to be way worse. We need to hear legends of a mutant who took over the world long ago and hope that he never comes back. So when Apocalypse arrives, we already know why we should be worried. Also, visually, Apocalypse needs to look weird. We need to go CGI here. Apocalypse's actual mutant power is that he can control his body on a molecular level. He can grow, turn his arms into swords and guns and shields. He can fly, whatever he can imagine. One thing that really bugged me about the X-Men Apocalypse movie was how that trailer had that one bit where Apocalypse grew real big in the X-Mansion, but then immediately as an audience member, I know, yep, dream sequence or mind battle or something like that, because they're not going to have him get bigger in the movie because that would be silly. But I want this Apocalypse to be constantly using his powers to modify his body so the X-Men never know what's coming next, and we could get real creative with it. Since the character is historically Egyptian, makes sense to go with at least a black or Middle Eastern actor here. I would love an Egyptian actor, but I don't think Rami Malek works, and he's the only big star I can think of. I have a feeling this casting will require an A-lister. The most important thing I'm looking for here is an Apocalypse who is deliberate. Every word he says is one he has been thinking about for eons. He cannot be convinced, he cannot be confused. Apocalypse is. My Apocalypse highlight panel comes from issue 5 of Jonathan Hickman's House of X. This one's kind of complicated. Basically, Charles, Magneto, and Moira McTaggart have used a bunch of mutant powers to colonize a sentient island and create a mutant paradise. The island is called Krakoa. They open up a gate and start letting mutants teleport to the island. In come a bunch of villains, but they're cool now. The last one to arrive is Apocalypse. He breathes the Krakoan air and smiles. Magneto explains,
I want to be clear here, Apocalypse. We will not risk losing this place because some of you might not value what is being offered.
So, is this gonna be a problem?
And why would it be, Wolverine? For centuries, I have fostered war and conflict, all in the hopes of mutantum finally asserting dominance over this world. Now, look at you. Look at all of you. You have finally become what I intended you to be. I could not be more proud.
Previous versions. Audible sigh. Do I love Oscar Isaac? Of course. Do I love Apocalypse? Of course. Do I think Oscar Isaac was the right choice to play this character? Probably not. Apocalypse is big, not just in stature, but, that definitely is part of it, but he's got a big presence. He's loud, bombastic, grand. And I think Oscar Isaac is best suited for understated performances, where every so often he goes big. Llewyn Davis, Ex Machina, Dune, Star Wars, Scenes from a Marriage, probably Moon Knight. He's charming, he's complex, he's interesting, he's got a lot going on, and that just isn't Apocalypse. Apocalypse knows exactly who he is and what he wants. Like Juggernaut, he is a force of nature. There needs to be a lot more to this performance than there is with Juggernaut, but I want an Apocalypse who feels like Thanos. He is scary from minute one. He is inevitable. And on top of that, I don't think the Apocalypse from X-Men Apocalypse got it what's interesting about the character. He's the kind of threat that brings the entirety of mutant kind together. The fact that the new kids and Magneto were able to beat him by themselves, pretty embarrassing, even if one of them was the Phoenix way too early. On top of that, the costume didn't work for me either. As much as I love a good short king, I cannot believe how small this Apocalypse was. He needs to look down on everyone, and that should probably be achieved with CGI, like Thanos. And the decision to give him pupils also really bugged me. It's a small thing, but Apocalypse is supposed to look otherworldly, and a great visual shorthand for that, lack of pupils. Yes, it makes it a bit more difficult for the actor to emote, but again, Apocalypse is very physical, big, he plays to the cheap seats. Runners up. Hey, is Lawrence Fishburne in Ant-Man and the Wasp? Yeah, but did you forget about that until I just said it? Also, yeah, so screw it, double cast him. He's got one of Hollywood's coolest voices, and he has proven with Morpheus that he can do the whole ethereal super being thing with style. I've heard a lot of people online bring up Lance Reddick, and you know what? You're absolutely right. The man's got more voice acting experience than anyone else on this list, and you know why? Because he's got a damn good voice. He was even Ra's al Ghul in Beware the Batman, and if that doesn't scream virtually immortal, megalomaniacal supervillain, I don't know what does. Now here are the big three. I tweeted that I was torn between these three guys, and I do have a winner, but first, let's get to the second runner-up. Yahya Abdul-Mateen II, who also happens to be the second Morpheus on this list. Also played Dr. Manhattan on Watchmen, who is all of Apocalypse's experience as an ageless Superman, and also his blueness. Mateen is also the first actor who I'd actually like to see on set. Like Juggernaut, we could do this fully CGI, or we could do Yahya in costume and enhanced via CGI. Made more muscular, taller, like David Thewlis in Zack Snyder's Justice League, except, good. Let's talk about my first runner-up. A lot of people suggested Giancarlo Esposito for Magneto, and I see it, he's great. Just doesn't fit with the profile I'm looking for a Magneto. However, could see him as Apocalypse. Look at that scene in The Boys where he stares down Homelander and tells the most powerful man in the world that he's acting like a child. That is the nerve I want from Apocalypse. I'd love to see him deliver something like a Shakespearean monologue to see how grand Esposito can be, but I trust he can get there. Plus, he was Lex Luthor on Harley Quinn. That's pretty good practice for Apocalypse. The winner. Do I think he would do it? Who knows? But man, Denzel Washington would be such an interesting choice. Yes, he tends to play very modern, grounded characters, lots of historical figures, lots of plays, but this year, Denzel wowed me as Macbeth in Macbeth and gave me the confidence that yes, he can deliver a Shakespearean monologue with the gravitas necessary to play Apocalypse. He's just one of our greatest living actors, so I would love to see him take on any superhero or supervillain role, and I think this is a great place for him. William Stryker is hate. The man just flat out hates mutants. He believes they are an affront to God and they need to be destroyed. In the comics, he killed his wife and his son when the son turned out to be a mutant, and Stryker took that as a sign that he needed to wage war against these monsters. William Stryker fights that war on a few fronts. Publicly, he's a very popular minister. Fire and brimstone, mutants of the devil, yada yada yada. And he's a star. In one story, he manages to pack Madison Square Garden for a rally. He is a really big deal. Stryker's also a political figure. He goes on television and debates people on mutant issues. He has not run for office, but Stryker advocates for anti-mutant legislation. And then behind the scenes, William Stryker is the leader of a group called the Purifiers. There are a couple of these in the comics: the Purifiers, the Right, the Friends of Humanity, different anti-mutant hate groups intent on destroying Homo Superior for one reason or another. The Purifiers are both high and low tech. They use simple weapons and guerrilla tactics to take on the X-Men, and in the comics, they even managed to capture Xavier, Cyclops, and Storm. No one knows that Stryker Stryker's in charge of the purifiers, but it's not difficult to put two and two together, and even if he wasn't secretly pulling the strings, Stryker would be fanning the flames that create the purifiers. But they're also high-tech. They created the anti-Cerebro that we see in X2, the best X-Men movie. Stryker organized the capture of Xavier so that he could power his machine and use it to kill all the mutants. Reverend Stryker is charismatic, cunning, and more than anything else, hateful. My highlight panel for this comes from Surprise Surprise, God Loves a Man Killed, my favorite comic. First part's simple. A kidnapped Storm asks Stryker, "We have done you no harm. Why are you doing this?" And Stryker answers,
"Because you exist, and that existence is an affront to the Lord."
But then the second is a bit from a sermon later in the book. Stryker says,
"Are we now to let those who put forward the proposition that we are descended from apes tell us that our descendants, our children, will be born monsters? And that this is natural? I say no! I say never! We are as God made us. Any deviation from that sacred template, any mutation, comes not from heaven, but hell."
Previous versions, I absolutely love Brian Cox's Stryker in X2. He is everything I want from a Stryker. Determined, insane, and on a mission from God. They changed his origin a bit, so he was also Wolverine's creator, so it's kind of like a mix between Reverend Stryker and Dr. Cornelius. In the comics, Stryker is primarily a reverend with a military background who is in charge of the purifiers, but I think that's actually a good thing because it leaves a new Stryker with a simple point of difference. This one is just a reverend, or at least that's what he's known for. The second generation Stryker, who premiered in Days of Future Past and reappeared in X-Men Apocalypse, played by Josh Hellman, was fine. He really functioned as no more than a military presence who was responsible for making Wolverine, I guess. Because not to nitpick, not unlike my podcast, mostly nitpicking, I still don't quite understand what the end of that movie was supposed to mean. Like, Mystique has the yellow eyes, so she is Stryker in that moment, and she looks at the camera, and so it's like, we're supposed to know that, and then in the next movie, she's not Stryker. But Stryker has Wolverine. But Stryker was also in that stadium with them. Like, they were all pretty close to each other. So what happened to the other Stryker in that moment? And like, they would drag Wolverine out of the river, and it's not like Mystique can just take him. The other Stryker would show up and be like, "Oh hey, yeah, cool, put him on the truck, that one's mine now." So I don't know, what was the plan there, Mystique? But the X-Men movies love to pick up threads in the end of a movie and then drop it before the next movie, like those costumes in X-Men Apocalypse that were gone by Dark Phoenix, which was a shame. Anyway, I love these X-Men movies. I wrote this video script and I needed to go back because even I forgot that Stryker is in the second generation. It might as well be Dr. Cornelius or another human villain like Cameron Hodge or Henry Gyrich, whatever. It's for the best. Now most audiences won't even remember Stryker has been in a movie since 2003. Addendum. I needed to do this again because then I was writing this script and then I wrote this extra stuff and then I was finished. I realized that I had forgotten Origins Wolverine also has a Stryker in Danny Houston. This is another barely Stryker that no one remembers, although he does hang out with OG Stryker Brian Cox on Succession in a scene that's, I guess, just for me. So that's neat. Runners up. I had one in mind for this one from the beginning, who I think could bring the fire to Stryker, but I actually found a few others that I kind of love. This is another area where Bryan Cranston could shine. He's angry, he's got that middle American thing down, and he's around the age I'm looking for. I don't think Stryker needs to be Southern, but it fits with the Righteous Gemstone Pat Robertson image. Speaking of the Gemstones, honorable mention to Baby Billy Walton Goggins. Obviously, he was already Sonny Burch in Ant-Man and the Wasp, and I actually didn't hate that character. I would like it if he comes back, and generally I'm pretty cool with double casting, but he's not in my top 3 here, so I don't think it would be worth it. But he's got the chops. I also think this is somewhere where Bill Hader could shine. I love putting comedians into villain roles, seeing what they do with it. He is intense, unpredictable. You could put him in a lot of different places, but I think this is an important one that he could nail. And this one's my number 3. And I didn't think he would work originally, but he grew on me. Arrested Development's own Jason Bateman. I'm still not even 100% on this one, but he's such an interesting actor. He keeps zigging when you expect him to zag. I think he could do it. Now my first runner-up, Michael C. Hall. This guy has everything. Clearly, he's angry. Man is famous for playing Dexter, but also he's charismatic. I think there are also a lot of MCU spots for someone as talented as Hall, but I think he would be an excellent evangelical Stryker. The winner. In my opinion, there is one man for the job. Matthew McConaughey. My God, I mean, can you imagine? He's got everything. He can play charming. He can play angry. He's Southern. He could deliver a monologue with such intensity and purpose, almost like a sermon. Think True Detective or The Wolf of Wall Street. He's also pretty down to earth in roles roles like Lincoln Lawyer and Mud. Matthew McConaughey plays a salt-of-the-earth guy, and that aspect of Stryker's image is crucial in selling him as a figure people believe in. So any of those guys would be good, but Matthew McConaughey would be an excellent William Stryker. Now I have one more character that I want to fan cast, who is not nearly as important as these other ones, but I do think will be important for a very specific reason. Arcade is a weirdo. He's basically the Marvel Riddler, or maybe more appropriately, he's like Marvel's Trickster. He designs death traps in his murder world and makes the X-Men either escape or die. Here's why I'm doing Arcade last. I think there's a chance we see him in a movie quickly. He's the only character on this list who has not shown up in a movie before or was not teased. And he is not a mutant. That is very important. I think the X-Men's first big adventure cannot be solving a problem they are connected to. If the X-Men come out of the shadows to fight the Professor's friend Magneto, and then in the second movie, fight another villain they kind of know, like Juggernaut, it'll feel a little pointless. Like Iron Man, all of their villains will be villains they helped create, or at least know. So the public perception that mutants are more trouble than they're worth will be kind of right. The good guys show up, the bad guys show up, they destroy town, and all the other people are just left to pick up the pieces. So what is Arcade? Well, they can go in a couple of different directions. He can be a big, silly, showy Joker kind of guy, or he can be a menacing, grounded reimagining of the character like the Batman's Riddler. Personally, I think the former is more fun. Go wild, get an actor who can choose scenery, big CGI death traps, that would be wild. His ideology can even kind of gel with what the X-Men are. Arcade stages big games of death because he believes in survival of the fittest and wants to push people to be smarter and stronger. So he puts them in these crazy situations, kind of like Jigsaw from the Saw movies. And maybe it is because mutants exist that he does this. That could work. So we're looking for someone with a big ego and some genuine menace. Arcade's highlight panel comes from a series called Avengers Arena. Arcade kidnaps a bunch of teenage superheroes and traps them on a battle royale kind of island where he forces them to kill each other. The whole affair starts with the heroes waking up in suspended animation while Arcade monologues. This intro is so great as an Arcade moment because it shows us exactly how Arcade wants to be seen, what he thinks is cool.
You're probably not gonna believe this, but I envy you kids, dangling up there, completely terrified. Ooh, now there's molten rock, lava. I'd like to think they'd be screaming if I let you, but it's better that you can't. Who is the badass boogeyman with the volcano elevator? I've got a crisp $100 bill for anyone who guessed Arcade.
Previous versions. There are none. Arcade has not shown up before in live action. As far as I know, I have not watched that Gifted show, Runners Up. Let's talk about Jim Carrey. Not because I think he should play this role, but because he is the blueprint for a character like this. He's already played the Riddler in Batman Forever, who at times felt a little more like Arcade than Riddler. The big battleship game, that is very Arcade. And now Carrey's back to his silly roots, as demonstrated by Sonic. However, there are rumors that he's already cast in an MCU role, so I don't think doubling up would be worth it here. But if we're looking for other zany weirdos, can I recommend Eric Andre? You either know him from the Eric Andre Show, where he does a bunch of crazy nonsense and makes Pauly D uncomfortable, or he is from The Lion King. The man has range. He goes big, he takes big swings. I would love to see his version of Arcade. Or how about Andy Samberg? He'd be a great villain. Like, he's got a terrific energy. I would love to see him set up a pinball machine of death. Or how about Bo Burnham? Not quite the same energy as Andre or Sandberg, but he could do weird. This Arcade can be a cagey nerd and still be a formidable villain. I also love Ben Schwartz. Have since Parks and Rec. He has a manic energy that when applied properly could be very scary. You never know what he's gonna do next. And he's enthusiastic. One important thing about Arcade is that he's having a ton of fun with his death traps. It's a game to him. And I do want a younger Arcade. Otherwise, yes, Martin Short would be a terrific pick for this role. But my winner. We've talked about Succession in this series a couple of times. Why stop now? Kieran Culkin, who plays Roman on Succession, has exactly the right energy for Arcade. He's dorky, but he can be cruel, and he has the potential to show some true humanity, but I think he is in exactly the right spot for a role like this. In conclusion, So that's it. Those are the 9 villains that should show up in an X-Men movie in the future, and 9 actors who I would love to see play those roles. Who do you think should play them? Let me know down in the comments, or tweet them to me at twitter.com/NandoVMovies, and make sure to use the hashtag XmenFancast so I see it. Next up, we have the final video in this series, casting the giant-sized X-Men, and a bunch of others. And I have to thank everybody who made this video possible, including the 9 other YouTubers who were able to lend their voices to the highlight panels. We had Eddie from Headache as Mr. Sinister, Tim from Hello Future Me as Magneto, Princess Weeks as Mystique, Laura Crone as Emma Frost, Comic Drake as Sebastian Shaw, 12 Tone as Professor Xavier, Scott from NerdSync as Apocalypse, Eric, aka Lord Ravenscraft, as Reverend William Stryker, and James from Schaeferless as Arcade, a character who I haven't named him in the video, mostly because I don't know if he has an actual first name. Like, I think that character is just named Arcade. And I talked in the middle of the video, I know it's been so long, about my Juggernaut deep dive. I spent a full 17 minutes talking about why the Juggernaut in X-Men The Last Stand is actually not so bad, and what design choices you could make to make it look not so weird, maybe even kind of good. And I do that in a video called In Defense of the Juggernaut, which you can watch right now on Nebula. I have so much extra content on Nebula. Videos about Watchmen, One Punch Man, Doom Patrol, Saints Row 4. Last month I made a video about The Mandalorian, and I think it's really cool so many of you guys have been subscribing to Nebula, watching all these extra videos, so I'm gonna keep making them. You can also go to Nebula, watch all my videos ad-free. It's really terrific. And we at Nebula have partnered with this video sponsor, Curiosity Stream, for a bundle that gets you a year of Nebula and Curiosity Stream for $15. That is $15 for the entire year. You can watch all our awesome Nebula content and everything on Curiosity Stream. They have so many interesting documentaries. Like, if you want to learn about how, in the real world, we could ever find the demon Sidorak who lives somewhere in space sitting on a big throne, you can check out a new documentary called Secrets of the Universe, the James Webb $10 billion Space Telescope. So all you need to do to sign up, go to curiositystream.com/Nando, and when you watch my Juggernaut video, tweet me, let me know if you agree that he was actually kind of maybe almost good. And of course, thank you to everyone who continues to support the channel on Patreon, everybody who listens to my podcast, Mostly Nitpicking, and everyone who follows me on Twitter and Twitch, where I did these drawings. I'm Nando V Movies on all of those platforms.